The ceramic mug felt heavier than usual in my arthritic hands that Tuesday morning. Funny how after 47 years of marriage you notice the smallest things. The way Margaret's breathing changes when she's nervous, how she taps her wedding ring against the counter when she's thinking, or how she's started making my tea differently these past 3 weeks. I'd been a detective for 32 years before retirement. Old habits die hard, they say, and they're right. You never really stop noticing things, cataloging behaviors, filing away inconsistencies for later examination. It's a blessing and a curse, especially when the person you're inadvertently investigating is the woman who's shared your bed for nearly half a century. Margaret stood at the kitchen counter, her back to me, humming that old Patsy Cline tune she loved. Crazy. How fitting. The morning sun streaming through our suburban Phoenix kitchen window caught the silver in her hair that had been auburn when we'd met at that police charity dance in 1977. She was still beautiful to me, even with the liver spots on her hands and the stoop in her shoulders that matched my own. "Harold, honey, your tea's almost ready," she said without turning around. Her voice had that forced cheerfulness she'd adopted recently, like she was trying too hard to sound normal. Another red flag in a growing collection. I watched her reflection in the microwave door, a trick I'd learned during stakeouts. Watch the reflections, the shadows, the spaces between actions. That's where the truth lives. Her hand moved to her apron pocket, fumbled with something small, then swept over my mug in a practiced motion. Quick. Deliberate. If I hadn't been watching, I'd have missed it entirely. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral, another skill from the job. "Smells good, Maggie," I said, using her pet name to gauge her reaction. She stiffened slightly, just a microsecond of tension in her shoulders. "I added extra honey, the way you like it," she replied, finally turning around. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Those green eyes that had once sparkled with mischief now held something else. Fear? Guilt? Determination? She placed both mugs on the kitchen table, the steam rising between us like a barrier. Hers was the one with the chip on the handle. She'd dropped it last Christmas and insisted on keeping it because our grandson Tommy had given it to her. Mine was pristine white with "World's Best Grandpa" printed in fading letters. "Sit down, dear. Drink it while it's hot," she urged, sliding into her usual chair. The chair where she'd sat for thousands of breakfasts, where she told me she was pregnant with our first child, where she'd cried when her mother died, where she'd laughed at my terrible jokes for decades. I remained standing, studying her face. The woman I knew better than anyone in the world had become a stranger in our own kitchen. "Actually, I need to grab my reading glasses first. Can't read the paper without them anymore." I laughed, that self-deprecating chuckle we old folks perfect when acknowledging our declining faculties. "Oh, they're right here," she said quickly, pulling them from her apron, the same pocket she'd reached into moments before. Too eager. Too prepared. I took the glasses, noting her fingers trembled as our hands briefly touched. "You know what, Maggie? I just remembered Dr. Morrison said I should cut back on the sweet stuff. Diabetes runs in my family. Why don't we switch? You take the one with extra honey." The color drained from her face like water from a bathtub. "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. Then, catching herself, she forced another smile. "I mean, I already made yours just right. I'll drink mine." But I was already switching the cups, my movements swift despite my 74 years. "Nonsense. You're always doing things for me. Let me do this small thing. What happened next will haunt me forever." Margaret's hand shot out to stop me, but it was too late. I'd already completed the switch, pushing her mug toward her and pulling mine, the one she'd doctored, to my side of the table. For a moment, we both froze, two elderly people caught in a tableau that belonged in a thriller novel, not in a retired couple's sunny kitchen in Scottsdale. "Harold, please," she whispered, and I heard 47 years of marriage in those two words. Love, fear, desperation, and something else. Resignation? I lifted the mug to my lips, watching her over the rim. Her green eyes widened, pupils dilating with panic. "Don't!" she cried out, lunging across the table with surprising agility. But she wasn't reaching for my mug, she was grabbing for hers, the original one meant for her. Time slowed, the way it used to during critical moments on the job. I saw her fingers wrap around the ceramic handle. Saw her bring it to her lips with shaking hands. Saw her throat work as she took a large swallow. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, sad and peaceful. "I couldn't let you suffer, Harold. Not the way Dad did." The mug slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor we'd installed together 5 summers ago. Tea splashed across the white tiles like a crime scene. "Margaret, what did you do? What did you just do?" She swayed slightly, gripping the table edge. "The diagnosis came back 2 weeks ago. Dr. Morrison called when you were at your poker game. Advanced pancreatic cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. She touched her stomach gently. "I've been hiding the pain, but it's getting worse." My mind raced, trying to process her words while simultaneously cataloging the symptoms I'd missed, or ignored. The weight loss I'd attributed to her new diet. The grimaces she'd hidden behind quick smiles. The extra naps she'd been taking. But the tea, what was in the tea? I demanded, already reaching for my phone to call 911. She covered my hand with hers, her skin already feeling cooler. "The same thing I've been putting in yours for 3 weeks, Harold. Vitamins. B12, D3, calcium supplements. The doctor said you were deficient. I was trying to help without making you feel old." A laugh bubbled up, tinged with irony. "But tonight, in yours, nothing. I couldn't go through with it." Relief and confusion warred in my chest. "Go through with what?" She reached into her apron pocket again, pulling out a small amber prescription bottle. The label read, "Morphine sulfate." My heart stopped. I filled Dad's old prescription. The one from his final days. I kept it after he passed, hidden in the back of the medicine cabinet. I thought if I could make it look like you went first, peacefully in your sleep, then I could follow. Insurance would pay out. The kids wouldn't suspect. Jesus Christ, Margaret. I sank into my chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "You were going to kill you?" "No. Never." She shook her head firmly. "I was going to put enough to make you sleep deeply. Then I'd take the rest. Make it look like I had a heart attack from the shock of finding you. The kids would think we went naturally, close together. Like those old couples you read about." Her voice was getting dreamier, words starting to slur. But I couldn't. Kept seeing your face. Kept thinking about our wedding day. The morphine. She'd drunk the morphine meant for me. I lunged for my phone, but she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No ambulance. Please. Let me have this choice." Like hell. I broke free, my fingers fumbling with the emergency call button. But even as I pressed it, I knew the truth. We were 15 minutes from the nearest hospital. She'd researched this. Planned it. My Margaret, who couldn't plan a grocery list without forgetting milk, had orchestrated this moment with the precision of a master criminal. "I love you, Harold James Mitchell," she said, her words growing softer. "I've loved you since the moment you arrested me for jaywalking just to get my phone number." "That was a warning, not an arrest," I corrected automatically, tears streaming down my face as the 911 operator answered. "And you gave me a fake number first." She laughed, that tinkling sound I'd fallen in love with decades ago. "Had to make sure you'd work for it." As I gave our address to the operator, begging them to hurry, Margaret's eyes began to flutter closed. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the table, across her face, across our clasped hands. The kitchen smelled of tea and honey and the lavender perfume she'd worn every day since our first date. The paramedics burst through our front door like a SWAT team, young kids, really, probably younger than our grandson Tommy. The girl, blonde ponytail swinging as she worked, couldn't have been more than 25. Her partner, a stocky Hispanic kid with kind eyes, immediately went to Margaret while barking questions at me. "What did she take?" How much? When? Morphine sulfate. Maybe 30 pills dissolved in tea. 5 minutes ago, no more than 7. My voice sounded clinical, detached. The cop in me had taken over while the husband fell apart. They worked with fierce efficiency, checking vitals, starting in 4, preparing Narcan. Margaret's eyes fluttered open briefly as they lifted her onto the gurney. She looked at me with such disappointment, such betrayal, that I nearly told them to stop. Sir, you need to step back, the blonde paramedic said, not unkindly. That's my wife. 47 years. The words came out broken. We've got her, sir. You can follow us to Scottsdale Memorial. As they wheeled her out, our neighbor, Betty Carmichael, stood in her doorway across the street, hand over her mouth. By noon, the whole neighborhood would know. By evening, our children would be flying in from their respective corners of the country, demanding answers I didn't have. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and familiar streets, made foreign by circumstance. I'd driven these roads thousands of times, but never following an ambulance carrying my wife who just attempted. What? Suicide? Murder-suicide? An act of mercy? At the hospital, they wouldn't let me see her immediately. I sat in the waiting room, a sterile beige purgatory that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The television mounted in the corner played a morning talk show where perky hosts discussed the best deals for Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day. How grotesquely appropriate. My phone buzzed. Jennifer, our eldest. I let it go to voicemail. Then Michael. Then Sarah. The kids had a group chat. One of them must have seen the ambulance on our street through the Ring doorbell app. Modern technology making family crisis management instantaneous and unavoidable. Mr. Mitchell? A doctor appeared, young, Indian, tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm Dr. Patel. Your wife is stable. We administered Narcan in time, and she's responding well. Physically, she'll recover from the overdose. Physically? I repeated. Yes. However, we've discovered the pancreatic mass she mentioned. It's significant. I've called in Dr. Morrison, her oncologist. He'll want to discuss treatment options. Treatment options? As if there were real options for advanced pancreatic cancer at 72. We both knew the statistics. 6% 5-year survival rate. Most gone within the year. Can I see her? Soon. She's asking for you, but Mr. Mitchell. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Given the circumstances, we're required to put her on a psychiatric hold. 72 hours minimum. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. She's dying of cancer and you want to make sure she's not suicidal? I understand the irony, sir. But the law is clear. The law. I'd spent my life enforcing it, believing in its power to create order from chaos. Now it seemed absurdly inadequate, like using a tablespoon to bail out a sinking ship. They finally let me see her 3 hours later. She looked small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and tubes. The efficient young nurse, Rodriguez, her badge said, gave us privacy, though I knew they were monitoring everything. You called them, Margaret said. Not a question. Of course I did. I didn't want this, Harold. The tubes, the machines, the pity. She gestured weakly at the 4-line. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. I pulled the uncomfortable visitor's chair close to her bed. By killing yourself? By trying to kill me first? I told you, I wasn't going to kill you. Just make you sleep through it. Oh, well, that makes it all better then. The sarcasm was a defense mechanism, one she knew well. She turned to stare at the ceiling. Do you remember when Buddy got hit by that car? How he dragged himself home, broken and bleeding, and hid under the porch? Buddy. Our first dog, a German shepherd we'd gotten as newlyweds. That was different. Was it? He was suffering. We knew he was dying. But he hid because that's what animals do, they go away to die alone, to spare their pack. Her voice cracked. I'm tired of being brave, Harold. tired of pretending I'm not terrified. The pain is getting worse. Soon I won't be able to hide it anymore. So you decided to make the choice for both of us? I made a choice for me. I just wanted you to not have to watch. She finally looked at me, and I saw the woman I'd married beneath the fear and medication. Do you know what Dad said at the end? When the morphine wasn't enough anymore? He begged me to help him die. Begged, Harold. My proud, strong father who fought in Korea, who built houses with his bare hands, reduced to begging his daughter to end his suffering. I remembered. Richard had lingered for months, cancer eating him from the inside while Medicare ate through his savings. Margaret had spent every day at his bedside, returning home hollow-eyed and silent. I promised myself, she continued, that I wouldn't put you or the kids through that. I'd go on my own terms. Our terms, I corrected. 47 years of marriage means our terms, not your terms. You'd have tried to save me. Spend every penny on treatments that might buy a few months. Watch me waste away, lost yourself in the process. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I've seen what caregiving does to the survivor. Betty Carmichael still hasn't recovered from losing Frank, and it's been 3 years. Betty Carmichael, who'd stood watching from her doorway this morning. Betty, who'd once confided that the last year of Frank's life had been hell on earth, watching him forget her name, changing his diapers, being cursed at by a man who'd once written her poetry. That's Alzheimer's. This is different. Is it? The destination's the same, Harold. Only the route changes. A knock interrupted us. Dr. Morrison entered, looking exactly as an oncologist should, competent, compassionate, and bearing terrible news wrapped in medical terminology. Margaret, Harold. He nodded to us both. I've reviewed the scans. I wish I had better news. He pulled up images on his tablet, pointing to white masses that looked like cosmic nebulas against the black of her internal universe. The primary tumor is here, in the head of the pancreas. But it's already metastasized to the liver and lymph nodes. Treatment options? I asked, though I already knew. We could try FOLFIRINOX, aggressive chemotherapy. It might give us 6 months, possibly 8. But the side effects would be severe. There's also radiation, palliative care focused on comfort. What would you do? Margaret interrupted. If it were your wife? Dr. Morrison, who I knew had been married 32 years, had twin daughters in medical school, paused. I can't make that decision for you. That's not what she asked? I said. He sighed, suddenly looking older. I'd focus on quality, not quantity. Make memories, not treatment plans. Our children arrived like an invasion force. Jennifer flew in from Seattle, trailing her husband Derek and their 2 teenagers. Michael drove from Los Angeles with his partner James. Sarah, pregnant with her second child, somehow managed the flight from Boston despite her husband Paul's protests. They gathered in Margaret's hospital room like a tribunal, each processing the news in their own way. Jennifer, ever the eldest, took charge immediately, grilling Dr. Morrison about second opinions and clinical trials. Michael sat silent, holding James's hand so tightly his knuckles went white. Sarah cried quietly, one hand on her swollen belly. Mom, how could you? Jennifer's voice cut through the hospital room like a scalpel. How could you even think about leaving us like that? Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, but Jennifer pulled away. I wasn't trying to leave you, sweetheart. I was trying to spare you. Spare us? Michael finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. By making Dad find your body. By traumatizing him for whatever time he has left. That's not... Margaret started, but Sarah interrupted. You were going to drug Dad. Our father. Without his consent. Sarah's tears had been replaced by anger, the pregnancy hormones amplifying every emotion. That's assault, Mom. That's attempted murder. The word hung in the air like a toxin. Murder. My wife, the woman who rescued spiders from the bathtub and fed stray cats, accused of attempted murder by her own daughter. Sarah! I snapped, my protective instincts overriding logic. Your mother would never. Wouldn't she? Sarah turned on me. She literally put morphine in your tea, Dad. If you hadn't switched the cups. She put morphine in her own tea, I corrected. Mine had vitamins. She couldn't go through with it. Derek, Jennifer's husband, cleared his throat. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere more private. The nurses. Let them hear, Margaret said quietly. I'm already on psychiatric hold. What else can they do to me? Mom. Michael moved closer to the bed, James standing supportively behind him. We need to understand. Help us understand. Margaret looked at each of her children in turn. Do you remember when Grandpa Richard died? They nodded. They'd been teenagers then, old enough to remember the hospital visits, the decline, the funeral. He suffered for 8 months. 8 months of pain that morphine couldn't touch. Of indignity that stripped away everything that made him who he was. He died at 2 a.m, alone because I'd finally gone home to shower. The nurse said he'd been calling for his mother. Her voice broke. His mother who'd been dead for 30 years. That won't be you, Jennifer insisted. Medicine has advanced. There are better pain management options now. Are there? Margaret laughed bitterly. Dr. Morrison just told us the same things they told us about Dad. Chemotherapy that might buy months. Radiation for pain. Palliative care. Different decade, same death sentence. But it's not just about you, Sarah protested, her hand unconsciously rubbing her belly. What about us? What about your grandchildren? Don't we deserve to say goodbye properly? Goodbye. Margaret repeated the word like she was tasting it. Such a clean word for such a messy process. Would you prefer to say goodbye to me now, while I'm still me? Or in 3 months when I'm 90 pounds and screaming in pain? Mom! Jennifer's composure finally cracked. Stop it. Just stop. But Margaret continued, relentless now. Should little Tommy remember Grandma as the woman who taught him to make chocolate chip cookies? Or as the skeletal figure who doesn't recognize him? Should Sarah's new baby's first impression of family be the smell of death and disinfectant? You don't get to make that choice for us, Michael said firmly. We're adults. We can handle it. Can you? Because I handled it with my father, and it nearly broke me. Dr. Reginald Watts looked like a psychiatrist from Central Casting, beard, elbow patches on his jacket, kind eyes that had seen too much. He interviewed Margaret alone first, then me, then wanted to see us together. Mrs. Mitchell, he began, settling into his chair with practiced ease. Help me understand your state of mind this morning. Margaret sat straighter, some of her old spirit returning. I was perfectly sound of mind, doctor. I made a rational decision based on medical facts and personal experience. A rational decision to end your life. To control the manner of my death, yes. There's a difference. And your husband? What was his role in your plan? I watched Margaret carefully construct her answer. Harold wasn't supposed to have a role. I wanted him to be absent from the decision. By drugging him. By giving him a sedative, yes. So he wouldn't have to watch or try to intervene. Dr. Watts made notes on his tablet. Mr. Mitchell, you were a detective for many years. Did you suspect what your wife was planning? I suspected something, I admitted. Her behavior had changed. But I thought maybe she was having an affair. The absurdity of it made me laugh. At our age, I was worried about an affair. Affairs of the heart aren't limited by age, Dr. Watts said mildly. Mrs. Mitchell, have you had suicidal thoughts before? No. This wasn't about wanting to die, doctor. It's about not wanting to die badly. Many would argue there's no difference. Many haven't watched pancreatic cancer kill someone they love. Margaret shot back. Dr. Watts turned to me. How do you feel about what your wife attempted? I'd been dreading this question. Angry. Betrayed. Terrified. I paused, then added, and guilty. Guilty? Because part of me understands. Part of me even agrees. I couldn't look at Margaret as I said it. We've been to too many funerals, Doctor. Watched too many friends deteriorate in ways that would horrify their younger selves. We've had the conversation every couple our age has, about not wanting to be a burden, about dying with dignity. But talking and doing are different things, Dr. Watts observed. Yes, I agreed. But the talking plants seeds. And when you get a diagnosis like Margaret's, those seeds suddenly bloom into terrible possibilities. Dr. Watts leaned back. Mrs. Mitchell, if I release you after the 72-hour hold, can you promise me you won't attempt to harm yourself again? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I can promise I won't do anything without discussing it with Harold first. That's not quite the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. But it's the only honest answer I can give you. After 5 days, they released Margaret. The psychiatric hold had been extended once, but eventually, Dr. Watts decided she wasn't an immediate threat to herself or others. The cancer, ironically, gave her a legal way out that no psychiatrist could prevent. Coming home was surreal. The kitchen had been cleaned, Jennifer's work, probably, but I could still see the ghost of spilled tea on the floor. The mugs had been washed and put away. The morning newspaper from that day sat folded on the counter, its headlines now ancient history. The kids had set up a rotation. Jennifer would stay for 2 weeks, then Michael, then Sarah after the baby came. They'd already contacted hospice services, arranged for a hospital bed to be delivered, stocked the refrigerator with foods Margaret could tolerate. They're planning for me to die, Margaret said, standing in our living room like a stranger. They're planning for you to live, I corrected. For as long as possible. She walked to the mantel, fingering the framed photos there. Our wedding. The kids' graduations. Grandchildren at various ages. This is what I wanted to preserve. These memories. Not the ones they're about to make. That night, lying in our bed for the first time since the incident, Margaret turned to me in the darkness. Are you afraid of me now? No, I said, though it wasn't entirely true. I'm afraid for you. There's a difference. I can feel it, Harold. The cancer. Like something feeding inside me. I pulled her closer, feeling how much weight she'd already lost. We'll fight it. With what? False hope and expensive chemicals? She sighed. I've already talked to hospice. When the time comes, I want comfort care only. No extraordinary measures. Margaret. Promise me, Harold. When I can't speak for myself anymore, you'll speak for me. You'll remember what I wanted. I thought about all the promises we made each other over the years. To love and cherish. To be faithful. To take out the garbage and remember anniversaries. This felt heavier than all of them combined. I promise, I whispered into her hair, which still smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant beneath her lavender shampoo. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and steady decline punctuated by moments of desperate normalcy. Margaret insisted on maintaining routines, morning tea, which I now made, afternoon walks, increasingly shorter, evening jeopardy, though she forgot answers she once knew. Jennifer had transformed our spare bedroom into a command center, medication charts, phone numbers, a calendar color-coded with appointments. She'd taken family medical leave from her job at Microsoft, approaching Margaret's care with the same intensity she brought to software development. Mom needs to take the Creon with every meal, she instructed me for the dozenth time. And the Dilaudid every 4 hours for pain, but we can add breakthrough doses if needed. I was a detective, Jenny, not an idiot. I snapped, immediately regretting it. Sorry. I'm sorry. She softened. I know, Dad. If I focus on the medicine schedule, I don't have to think about why she needs it. One afternoon, I found Margaret in the garage, standing by my workbench. She was holding the bottle of morphine, the one from her father, the one that had started this whole nightmare. I thought the hospital confiscated that, I said carefully. This is a new prescription. My own this time. She set it down among the screwdrivers and wrenches. Dr. Morrison prescribed it for breakthrough pain. Margaret. I'm not going to do anything, Harold. Not without telling you. She picked up a hammer, testing its weight. Remember when we built that treehouse for Michael? You hit your thumb so hard the nail went flying across the yard. You kissed it better, I recalled. Then made fun of me for cursing in front of the kids. You said words I didn't even know you knew. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I want to have one more good day, Harold. Before it gets worse. One day where we pretend none of this is happening. So we did. We drove to Sedona, to the Red Rocks where we'd honeymooned. I had to stop 3 times for her to rest, and she could barely eat the picnic lunch I'd packed, but for a few hours, we were just Harold and Margaret again, not patient and caregiver. Look, she said, pointing to a hawk circling overhead. Remember our anniversary trip here? 25 years? You wore that sundress with the yellow flowers. You said I looked like sunshine. She leaned against me, her weight barely noticeable. I haven't felt like sunshine in a long time. That night she had her first seizure. The cancer had reached her brain. Michael had taken over from Jennifer, bringing a gentleness to the caregiving that his sister's efficiency had lacked. His partner James cooked elaborate meals Margaret couldn't eat, filling the house with the smell of life even as death crept closer. Dad, Michael said one evening, finding me in the garage organizing tools that didn't need organizing. Mom's asking for you. She was in the hospital bed we'd set up in the living room, surrounded by the familiar, her reading chair, the grandfather clock that chimed every hour, the window overlooking her garden. The roses she'd planted last spring bloomed without her tending, a cruel reminder that life continued regardless. Harold, she said, her voice thin but clear, I need to tell you something. I sat on the bed's edge, careful not to disturb the web of tubes and wires. I'm here. The tea. That morning. I need you to understand. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. I'd been planning it for weeks. Reading about it online, in forums for people like me. Terminal patients sharing methods, dosages, final words. Margaret, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Listen. Her green eyes, though dimmed by medication, held mine. There's a whole community of us, Harold. People facing the end, trying to maintain control. Some travel to Switzerland or Oregon. Some stockpile pills. Some just wait and suffer. Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd have tried to stop me. Or worse, you'd have helped. She touched my face. I couldn't make you complicit. But I also couldn't leave you without warning. That's why I'd been so obvious about the tea. Part of me wanted you to notice, to stop me. But I did notice. Yes. A ghost of her old smile appeared. My detective. Always watching, even when you pretend not to be. That night, unable to sleep, I found the forums she'd mentioned. Pages and pages of desperate people sharing their fears, their plans, their regrets. Screen names like At Terminally Tired and At Dying with Dignity discussing lethal doses and peaceful methods with the clinical detachment of a medical journal. Margaret's username was at TNSympathy47. Her last post, dated the morning of the attempt. Today's the day. H doesn't know. I love him too much to make him choose. If you're reading this later, know that love sometimes means leaving before you become someone else entirely. The responses poured in after news of her failed attempt somehow reached the community. Glad you're still here. Every day is a gift, even the hard ones. Your husband chose for you. That's not love, that's control. You'll get another chance. We always do in the end. I closed the laptop, feeling like I'd violated something sacred. These weren't just forum posts, they were final testimonies of people facing the ultimate threshold. We need to talk about what happens next, Margaret said during a lucid moment. Sarah had arrived, newborn daughter in tow, and the whole family was gathered in the living room. Mom, please, Jennifer started, but Margaret held up a trembling hand. No. We've avoided this long enough. She looked at each of us. I have maybe 2 weeks. Dr. Morrison was very clear. My organs are shutting down. Sarah was crying again, holding baby Margaret. Yes, they'd named her after her grandmother, tight against her chest. There must be something. There's nothing, Margaret said firmly. But there are things I need to say. Jennifer, stop trying to fix everything. You can't debug death like a computer program. Your spreadsheets and schedules won't change the outcome. Jennifer's face crumpled, the executive facade finally breaking completely. Michael, Margaret continued, stop feeling guilty for being happy with James. You found love. Celebrate that. Don't let my death overshadow your life. Michael nodded, unable to speak. Sarah, sweet Sarah. That baby is not me reincarnated. She's her own person. Let her be. Mom, Sarah whispered. And Harold. Margaret turned to me, those green eyes still capable of seeing straight through me. You need to forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. Liar. She smiled. You're angry. Furious that I tried to leave you. That I'm leaving you now. That's okay. Be angry. But then let it go. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Margaret and I lay together in the hospital bed, awkwardly arranged around medical equipment. I'm scared, she admitted in the darkness. So am I. Not of dying. Of the in-between. The place where I'm not Margaret anymore but not gone either. I thought of her father, calling for his long-dead mother. Of Betty Carmichael's husband cursing at the woman he'd loved. You'll always be Margaret to me. Don't lie to a dying woman, Harold Mitchell. But she squeezed my hand. There's something else. In my jewelry box, under the false bottom. Papers. I knew that false bottom. I'd built it for her years ago to hide surprise anniversary gifts. What papers? Just promise me you'll look. After. Margaret. Promise. I promise. The last week was both endless and too quick. Margaret slipped in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for people long dead, sometimes perfectly lucid. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Patricia who'd seen too many deaths to count, taught us about the death rattle, about mottled skin, about the strange energy burst that sometimes preceded the end. She might have a surge, Patricia explained. Seem better suddenly. Some families think it's a miracle, a recovery. It's not. It's the body's last gift, a chance to say goodbye. Margaret's surge came on a Tuesday. She woke clear-eyed, requesting her favorite foods, though she could only manage small bites, asking to see photo albums, telling stories we'd heard 100 times but listened to like scripture. Remember our first apartment? She asked, surrounded by family. That horrible green carpet, and the neighbor who played saxophone at 3 a.m.? You wanted to file a noise complaint. I recalled. I wanted to slash his tires. My law-abiding detective. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes. You never did either. Just suffered in silence and bought earplugs. She held court for 6 hours, dispensing wisdom, jokes, and love in equal measure. Tommy, our eldest grandchild, played her favorite song on his guitar. Baby Margaret gurgled and cooed, bringing unexpected smiles. Even Jennifer relaxed enough to tell the story of how she'd snuck out at 16 and Margaret had caught her but never told me. Your father knew, Margaret revealed, causing Jennifer's jaw to drop. He was a detective, sweetheart. He always knew. We just chose our battles. As the sun set that Tuesday evening, Margaret grew tired. I need to rest now, she said, and we all knew what she meant. The children took turns saying private goodbyes. I don't know what was said, those words belonged to them alone. When my turn came, Margaret was barely conscious but squeezed my hand when I spoke. 47 years, Maggie? You gave me 47 years. Not enough, she whispered. Forever wouldn't have been enough. She smiled slightly. The tea, forgive me? Already forgiven. Always forgiven. The papers, don't forget. I won't forget. She said 3 more words that night. Love you, Harold. Then she slipped into what Patricia called active dying. That liminal space between worlds where breathing becomes irregular, where the body begins its final shutdown. We kept vigil in shifts. I refused to leave, sleeping in the chair beside her bed, waking every time her breathing changed. Jennifer timed the gaps between breaths. Michael held her hand and talked about his childhood memories. Sarah sang lullabies to both Margarets, the dying and the newly born. On Thursday morning, Patricia checked Margaret's vitals and caught my eye. Soon, she mouthed. The family gathered. We told Margaret it was okay to go, that we'd be all right, lies that felt like love. Her breathing grew shallower, with longer pauses between each breath. 20 seconds. 30. 40. At 11:47 a.m. on Thursday, June 15th, Margaret and Mitchell took her last breath. It was gentle, like a sigh of relief. The grandfather clock chimed noon 13 minutes later, marking time that no longer mattered to her. The machinery of death kicked in immediately. Patricia made the official pronouncement, called the funeral home, helped us wash and dress Margaret's body before they took her. It felt both intimate and surreal, tending to this shell that had housed the woman I loved. The children handled arrangements with frightening efficiency. Jennifer created a spreadsheet of tasks. Michael coordinated with the church. Sarah wrote the obituary. I moved through it all in a fog, responding when spoken to, signing where indicated, a ghost haunting my own life. The funeral was beautiful, I'm told. Hundreds came, friends, neighbors, people I didn't even know Margaret had touched. Jennifer delivered a eulogy that had everyone sobbing. Michael sang, Amazing Grace, in a clear tenor that would have made Margaret proud. Sarah read a poem about mothers and daughters and the threads that bind generations. I said nothing. What could I say that 47 years hadn't already said? Betty Carmichael cornered me at the reception. She was brave, she said. Braver than I was with Frank. What do you mean? Betty looked around, then leaned closer. I know what she tried to do. That morning with the tea. Patricia told me, we used the same hospice service. Patricia shouldn't have. Oh, hush. We're old, Harold, not stupid. Half the people in this room have thought about it. The pills in the medicine cabinet. The car in the closed garage. The gun in the nightstand. She patted my arm. Margaret just had the courage to try. Courage? The word tasted bitter. She tried to drug me. To spare you. There's a difference. Betty's eyes were kind but firm. When Frank was dying, begging me to help him go, I didn't have Margaret's courage. I let him suffer because I was too afraid, of judgment, of jail, of guilt. Your Margaret loved you enough to risk all of that. That night, alone in our house for the first time in weeks, I remembered Margaret's final request. In her jewelry box, under the false bottom I'd installed years ago, I found an envelope with my name on it. Inside were 3 things: a smaller sealed envelope marked, For Harold, open after 1 year, a life insurance document I didn't know existed, and a printed email exchange. The insurance policy was for $2 million, taken out 15 years ago, with premiums paid from an account I didn't know about. The beneficiaries were our children and grandchildren, with specific instructions for education funds. The email exchange was between Margaret and someone named David, dated 2 weeks before her suicide attempt. Margaret, I understand your position, but I need you to understand mine. As your attorney, I cannot and will not provide advice on end-of-life decisions. However, I can confirm that your will is in order, the insurance policies are valid, and would remain so regardless of circumstances, given the 2-year contestability period has long passed. Please talk to Harold. He deserves to know what you're considering. Margaret's reply: Thank you for everything, David. You've been a good friend. Harold will understand, eventually. He always does. 2 days after the funeral, Detective Sofia Martinez knocked on my door. I'd worked with her father back in the day, good cop, better person. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry for your loss. She began, and I knew this wasn't a condolence call. Who reported it? I asked, stepping aside to let her in. Hospital protocols. The psychiatric hold, the circumstances. She pulled out a notebook. I need to ask you about the morning of May 2nd. I told her everything. The switched cups, the morphine, Margaret's diagnosis. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, maintained professional detachment despite the tears in her eyes. Your wife attempted to sedate you without consent, she said finally. That's technically assault. And the suicide attempt. She was dying anyway. I know. But the law doesn't make exceptions for terminal illness. Not in Arizona. She closed her notebook. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to file my report. It will say that Margaret Mitchell, facing terminal cancer, attempted suicide by morphine overdose. Her husband intervened. Given that Mrs. Mitchell has passed from natural causes, the case will be closed. And the assault? What assault? I interviewed Harold Mitchell, who stated his wife had been giving him vitamins in his tea to help with some deficiencies. He was fully aware and consenting. She stood to leave, then paused. Your wife visited my father in hospice last year. Brought him cookies, read to him when my mother needed breaks. She was a good woman, Mr. Mitchell. Yes, I agreed. She was. After Martinez left, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at the table where it all began. The new mugs Jennifer had bought sat in the cupboard, and used. I pulled out the old ones, mine still saying, "World's best grandpa." Margaret's with the chip on the handle. I made tea the way Margaret used to, with too much honey, and sat at the table. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits. Somewhere, a dog barked. A lawn mower started. Life continued its relentless march. My phone buzzed. Jennifer. Dad, we're worried about you. Michael's coming by with dinner. Then Michael. James made lasagna. Your favorite. See you at 6. Sarah. Baby Margaret smiled today. A real smile. Sending photos. The photos came through, my granddaughter, 2 months old now, grinning toothlessly at the camera. She had Margaret's eyes, that same green that could see through you. 1 year later, I sat at the same kitchen table, the sealed envelope in front of me. For Harold opened after 1 year. Margaret's handwriting, still clear despite the pain she must have been in when she wrote it. The year had been educational. I'd learned to cook beyond basic survival. Joined a grief support group at Jennifer's insistence, quit after 2 sessions, then joined another one that didn't make me want to scream. Started walking every morning, the way Margaret and I used to, though now accompanied by a rescue dog Michael had convinced me to adopt. Buddy too, I called him, though his official name was Rex. Betty Carmichael and I had become strange friends, bonded by our shared understanding of loss and the complicated feelings around how our spouses died, or tried to die. Open it already, Betty said now, sitting across from me with her own cup of tea. We'd fallen into this routine, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, tea and conversation that ranged from profound to mundane. I slipped my finger under the seal, pulled out a single sheet of paper covered in Margaret's neat script. My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, then you've given me the year I asked for. A year to be angry, to grieve, to hopefully understand. I know what I did was wrong. Unforgivable, maybe. I tried to take away your choice in the name of protecting you, which makes me no better than those who would have taken away mine. The irony isn't lost on me. But I need you to know why. Not to excuse it, but to explain it. I watched my father die badly. But worse, I watched my mother live badly after. She survived 8 years, Harold. 8 years of guilt that she hadn't helped him, 8 years of remembering his suffering, 8 years of existing without living. I couldn't bear the thought of you carrying that weight. 5 years have passed since that morning with the tea. 5 years since Margaret tried to leave on her own terms and ended up leaving on ours. Or perhaps, in the end, they were the same thing. Time has a way of softening edges, of turning sharp pain into dull ache, of transforming unbearable absence into livable emptiness. I'm 79 now, teaching Tommy to work with wood in the same garage where Margaret hid her letters. He's 17, all gangly limbs and unexpected wisdom, the same age I was when I decided to become a cop. Baby Margaret, not such a baby anymore, helps us, her 5-year-old hands steady as she holds the sandpaper. She has her grandmother's eyes and her determination, plus something uniquely her own, a fierce joy that makes even simple tasks feel like adventures. Grandpa, she asked yesterday, running her small fingers over the smooth surface of the jewelry box we're making, why do you have 2 pictures of Grandma by your bed? One from our wedding, one from her last good day. Young Margaret with her crown of auburn hair and nervous smile, older Margaret with her silver wisdom and knowing eyes. To remember all of her, I said. But they're the same person, she insisted with 5-year-old logic. Yes and no, I told her. People contain multitudes, little one. Your grandma was 1,000 different women in one lifetime. Betty Carmichael and I play cards on Thursdays now, not bridge, poker. She's terrible at bluffing. Her left eye twitches when she has a good hand, but she's good company. We don't talk about dating, despite what our children think. They see 2 lonely old people and assume romance is the cure. They don't understand that some companionships transcend romance, built instead on shared understanding of a very specific kind of loss. We talk about our spouses, about the complicated grief of losing someone who tried to leave early, about the guilt of still being here when they're not. Betty tells me things she's never told anyone, how Frank begged her to increase his morphine dose, how she almost did it, how she still wonders if her cowardice or her courage kept her from it. Margaret was braver than me, she said last week, dealing cards with her arthritis-gnarled hands. She actually tried. Or more desperate, I countered, arranging my hand. Or more afraid. We'll never really know, will we? The support group I eventually stuck with has become a strange family. We meet Wednesdays in the basement of St. Luke's, not because we're particularly religious, but because they have good coffee and don't ask questions. We call ourselves the survivors. Not because we survived loss, but because we survived the complex trauma of our loved ones' attempts to control their deaths. There's Robert, whose wife Ellen drove into the garage with the door closed but survived when their teenage son came home early from school, only to die of her lung cancer 3 months later. He still can't park in that garage. There's Maria, whose husband stockpiled pills but couldn't go through with it, then lived another year that was both gift and curse. There's James, not Michael's James, a different one, whose partner flew to Switzerland but called him from the airport, came home, and died in hospice 6 weeks later. The almost, James calls it. We're all living with the almost. We don't judge. We don't compare pain. We just acknowledge the complicated truth that sometimes love looks like leaving, and sometimes it looks like staying, and sometimes it looks like switching cups of tea on a Tuesday morning in May. Dr. Watts, the psychiatrist from the hospital, came to speak to our group once. You're all dealing with a unique form of survivor's guilt, he said. You saved someone who didn't want to be saved, only to watch them die anyway. It challenges our fundamental beliefs about life, death, and autonomy. It challenges our beliefs about love, Maria corrected him. Everything else is just philosophy. I've read most of Margaret's letters now. Each one is a small resurrection, bringing her back for the few minutes it takes to read her words. The one for when the Cardinals lost, they did, spectacularly, and her letter mostly consisted of creative cursing. The one for Jennifer driving me crazy, she does, regularly, and Margaret's advice was, remember she's exactly like you, that's why she drives you nuts. The one for when I burn dinner, often, and that letter included the recipe for her foolproof lasagna, which turns out isn't foolproof at all. Each letter is perfectly her, funny, wise, slightly bossy, full of love and the mundane details that make a life. One letter labeled, "For when you can't find your reading glasses," simply said, "Check your head, you old fool." Love em. She was right. They were on my head. But I'm saving some. Her letter for my 80th birthday. For Tommy's wedding. For baby Margaret's high school graduation. For moments I might not see but like to imagine I will. They sit in the wooden box like promises, like faith, like defiance against the uncertainty of mortality. Michael and James visit every Sunday, bringing groceries I don't need and concern I try to appreciate. Michael has his mother's kindness but also her tendency to hover. Last week, he suggested, again, that I consider senior living options. I am living senior LY. I told him. Right here. Dad, you're almost 80. This house is too big. This house is exactly the right size for my memories. I interrupted. When it gets too big for those, I'll consider moving. Jennifer approaches my aging like a software problem to be debugged. She's installed smart home devices everywhere, lights that turn on automatically, a doorbell that records everything, a speaker that listens to my every word in case I fall and need to call for help. Sometimes I tell it stories about Margaret just to imagine someone, somewhere, is listening. Sarah, 8 months pregnant with her third child, waddles over when she can. She's naming this one Richard, after Margaret's father. Is that okay? She asked, worried about my reaction. Your mother would love it, I assured her. She'd probably also leave a letter about it. And sure enough, when I checked the box, there was one. For when they name a baby after Dad. Last month, I found myself in the kitchen at 7 a.m. making tea. The morning ritual I've maintained for 5 years now. I pulled out both old mugs, the one with the chip and mine with the fading letters. I made 2 cups, one with too much honey, and sat at the table. The morning sun slanted through the window, casting the same shadows, painting the same golden patterns on the worn wood. I understand now, I said to the empty chair across from me. You weren't trying to leave me. You were trying to save me from watching you leave. You thought you were protecting me from the trauma of caregiving, from the slow dissolution of the woman I loved into someone neither of us recognized. The house creaked, the way old houses do, settling into its bones, and for a moment I could swear I smelled lavender. Not the sharp, artificial scent of air freshener, but the soft, warm smell of Margaret's perfume, the one she'd worn every day since 1977. But you were wrong, Maggie, I continued, speaking to the empty chair as I often do now. Watching you die didn't break me. It completed me, in the way only shared grief can. Those last weeks, yes, they were horrible. Yes, you suffered. But you also laughed. You also loved. You also lived, right up until the moment you didn't. The morphine is still in the garage, in the back of the medicine cabinet behind my blood pressure medication and the multivitamins I never remember to take. Margaret's prescription and her father's, 2 generations of pain relief turned potential escape route. I keep them as reminders, not of death, but of choice. Of the terrible, beautiful, impossible choices love asks us to make. Sometimes I think about distributing them, these leftover pills that represent so much. But to whom? Robert, who still dreams of his wife in that garage? Maria, whose faith prohibits even the thought? Betty, who's made her peace with whatever comes? We're all walking our own tightropes between wanting to stay and being ready to go. The detective in me, the part that never really retired, sometimes reconstructs that morning like a crime scene. The way Margaret's hand trembled as she reached into her pocket. The practiced motion that wasn't quite practiced enough. The relief in her eyes when I switched the cups. Was it relief that I'd saved her, or relief that she wouldn't have to go through with it? I've analyzed every second, every micro-expression, every word spoken and unspoken. Was it the detective's instinct that saved us both that day? Or was it something deeper? 47 years of knowing someone so well that their secrets become visible, their lies transparent, their love so clear that even their attempt at mercy looks exactly like what it is. I don't know. But I'm grateful for that moment of clarity, for the choice to switch the cups, for the extra weeks it gave us. Margaret was wrong about one thing: watching her die didn't break me. It taught me that love isn't protecting someone from pain, it's going through the pain together, even when one of you is leaving and one is staying behind. Yesterday, Tommy asked me if I ever regret saving her that morning. We were sanding the jewelry box, smooth strokes turning rough wood into silk, and his question hung in the sawdust-filled air. Never, I said, and meant it. Those last weeks were a gift. Painful, yes. Terrible, often. But also full of grace. Your grandmother got to hold baby Margaret. She got to see you receive your acceptance letter to Arizona State. She got to tell each of us exactly what we meant to her. That's worth more than a peaceful exit. But she suffered, Tommy said quietly. We all suffer, son. The question is whether we suffer alone or together. The sun is setting now, painting the phoenix sky in shades of pink and gold that Margaret used to call God's watercolors. Somewhere, someone is making tea with too much honey. Somewhere, someone is keeping secrets out of love. Somewhere, someone is switching cups, choosing life over death, choosing the harder path of watching, waiting, holding on until the last possible moment. And somewhere, if you believe in such things, Margaret is watching me write this, shaking her head at my sentimentality, planning to leave me a letter about it. For when you get too philosophical, and loving me still, always still, forever still. The truth, I've learned, isn't simple. It's not that Margaret tried to kill herself and I stopped her. It's not that she tried to kill me and failed. The truth is that two people who loved each other faced an impossible situation and each tried to protect the other in their own flawed way. The truth is that love sometimes looks like letting go and sometimes looks like holding on, and wisdom is knowing which moment calls for which. The truth is that every morning, I make 2 cups of tea and remember,